In the fall of 1967, a small group of members of the Spencerville Seventh-day Adventist Church sensed the call to form a congregation in a part of Howard County that was at that time dark, without an Adventist presence. Driven by mission to bring the light of present truth to the region, the small group met most often in the homes of Wallace Malcolm and Phil Lang. Phil Lang later became the first head elder of the Triadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church. Beginning in October of 1967, the pioneering group rented the Glen Elg Methodist Church for their Sabbath services. At that time, the Methodist Church was located on Triadelphia Road. The location of the Glen Elg Church on the Triadelphia Road and the nearby Triadelphia Reservoir provided the impetus for the name of the new church plant.
Elder May decided that I ought to be a pastor, so he assigned me to Tom Mostert as an intern. I was supposed to go to the Spencerville church. I never got there once. 2 weeks later, he called me again and said, well, that's the end of your internship. I want you now to take the other church, which is Triadelphia, and that old Methodist church up in Glen Elg. And he said, here's your job. I want you to find a piece of ground, raise the money, buy the ground, design and build the church, and fill it up. I said, wow, is that all there is to ministry? So, went to work. We found a piece of ground, raised the money, bought the ground, worked on designing the church with Buddy Hart, and just about ready to break ground when he moved me to Salisbury.
At the Chesapeake Conference constituency meeting in March of 1968, delegates voted to constitute the Triadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church with 50 charter members. After a couple of years of prayer, literally knocking on doors, and fasting, the infant church finally purchased 4.78 acres along Brighton Dam Road in July of 1970. 3 years later, having paid off the land mortgage, a groundbreaking ceremony was held on April 15 of 1973. It was attended by Howard County and Chesapeake Conference officials, as well as local church members.
The excitement about finally getting ready to start building a house for the Lord after all the problems that we had, trying to change the floodplain and trying to be ready for after all the paperwork was done and all the revisions had to be made to actually get to the place where we were putting the shovels in for the first time. That was the excitement that I remember about the day that we started and dedicated to the Lord this process of actually beginning to build.
Church members young and old, under the guidance of experienced construction contractors Roy Tatry, Wallace Malcolm, and Helmut Yadomski, helped to build the church, which had been designed by architect Buddy Hart.
Hey, Buddy Hart was a very fine architect, but he also was doing nursing homes and hotels and stuff, and he made more money at those. So it didn't take me very long to figure that out, and so I went to his house down in Tacoma Park every Monday morning at 8 o'clock, because when I was there, he'd work on my church. When I would leave, he'd lay it aside and go back to things that made him money. And we became really close friends. I even ended up having his funeral a few years ago. And there was a member of the art department of the Review that took the plan that Buddy did and did a rendering. And it was a very well done picture of what the church would look like. And that helped us raise money. I remember I went to one of our members and I said, I need somebody that would put in the lead gift toward our building program. And he said, well, what would that be? And I said, well, I need somebody that would start us off with a $10,000 gift.
Around this time, the Methodist congregation sold the old church Triadelphia had been renting, and the Triadelphia congregation briefly rented the space of the more recently constructed Methodist church on Burnt Woods Road. One of the first baptisms to be held was while the church was yet under construction. 2 souls committed their lives to Christ on June 7, 1975. Neil Sauter and Joyce Ludi.
Well, the day of my baptism, I came over here bright and early and met some friends over here. My husband and family did not know about that I was doing this, that I had chosen to do this. And it was a beautiful, beautiful day in April. There were no clouds in the sky at the time. So I was excited and I was nervous, but the baptism itself was interesting because the walls were up, but the roof was only the beams. And so when the actual baptism took place and I was being dipped, I looked up at the blue sky, and just about that time, a bird flew over. And I thought that was God's blessing.
9 years after setting out to establish a presence in a section of Howard County devoid of representation of the unique Advent message, the Triadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church held its first service in their own sanctuary on June 5, 1976. In line with their missionary outlook, 3 baptisms were held as a part of that inaugural Sabbath service.
Well, my husband, Bob Sanford, was in Europe working on a NASA project. So I came by myself with our 2 boys, Jay and Russell, and I put them in Sabbath school, and then I crept up the stairs to see what was going on up here. It was totally unfinished, and the sun came through the stained glass window, which was made by one of the members, Dennis Cruz, and I felt like the Holy Spirit just came in on a sunbeam, and I really liked it.
It was in October of 1976 that we first visited here. It was an incredibly rainy day, very dark. You know how it gets when it's really rainy in October. It just, really dark day, very cloudy. And as we headed home, I think my sister was driving, I can't remember for sure. She said, "Wasn't that a beautiful stained glass window?" And I said, "What stained glass window?" Because it was so dark, my attention was not called to it because it was very dark. The second time I was here was in 1977 in May. And there are some pictures from that occasion that I brought my camera. It was a beautiful day, stunningly beautiful spring day. The third time that I visited was the last day of June in 1977, and that's when I turned in my request for transfer membership here. Just the third time I was here. And my sister and I were voted into membership here the last day of September in 1977, so it's been almost exactly 46 years that I've been a member here.
10 years after their first service in the sanctuary on May 10, 1986, a dedication service was held where the mortgage was burned. The church had paid off an estimated $225,000 mortgage.
The Weatheralls had a open house at their house on numerous occasions where they invited the community to come in and taste and see about how people live with just vegetarian living, from good foods that had no meat involved in it whatsoever. And it was just amazing to the community, and some of them actually attended our church as a result of that.
Most of us lived in a 5-mile circle around the church. And so you had connections in the community. We had standing room only when Mrs. Lang arranged to have a hydrotherapy water treatment class. We were all surprised at how many people came out to learn how to treat family members. And we had bread makes and a clothing exchange, back-to-school clothing exchange. They brought, for every 2 items you brought, you could take one, and it turned out everybody was bringing 10 items for every one they would take, but it was nice for the community to get together. The biggest thing we did with the community was maybe later on through Ann's House of Nuts. Joyce and I would order nuts in cases We had $1,200 profit for an investment offering at 1 year and maybe more the next year.
Further maximizing the use of the property owned by the church, members Laverne Binder and Bob Blum spearheaded the construction of the Chapel in the Woods in 1996. When the pandemic hit in 2020, this space became invaluable. Chandler Riley and Fred Harding led out in the project to power the outdoor meeting space, facilitating continued services during times of social distancing. From the start, Triadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church was established to be a light in Howard County. The building represents the commitment to the mission that its pioneers had and stands as a physical manifestation of the ministry of its members. But let's not just admire the past. Let's gain inspiration from those who've gone before us and set their vision as our foundation to be the hands and feet of Jesus in our community.